guys, welcome back for part 2 of Setup. I want to talk to you about the two-wheel drive again, but before we start, don't forget to click on subscribe, like, click on the bell, leave a comment, and enjoy the future videos. So let's talk more about now. I've got a new Bodyshell scheme, thanks to Brendan Nunn. He does some fantastic body shells. I think it's at God RC, and does a brilliant job. I've gone for the Captain America scheme. RDT, Richie Thorpe, RDT products. I've done me a cool chassis skin and some really cool stickers to go with it, so really pleased. Okay, so this is my race car, and I want to talk to you about a couple of things on the cars. So what should we talk about first? I've got a little list. I'm going to first talk to you about roll bars on the two-wheel drive. Generally we run a roll bar on the back of the car, so let's look at the roll bar. Where is it? It's just in the back here. There's this fine little piece of wire. Doesn't look like it's going to do much, but it is. Remember, this video is for beginners, so you might not realise how effective a roll bar will be on the car. And basically what a roll bar does is it's an anti-roll bar, so stops your car flipping over, but that doesn't normally happen. You only normally flip over because the car isn't rolling enough. So normally you can see a really lazy car leaning through a corner, and it will only really flip over at high speed. And so what you find is the anti-roll bar keeps the car flat, allows the whole car to squat down. So when you look at the back and you go into a corner, when that wheel lifts up, it's going to lift that one up with it, okay? So that lifts up, that one comes with it, and so you can really go through a corner flat instead of leaning, which then makes you kind of lose a bit of corner speed if it leans too much. The disadvantages of running a roll bar, especially if it's too thick, you're getting the power, you'll do the steering movement, and you're accelerating, and the car will push and wash out your front tyres, will scrub off. But that's only if you're running a really hard one. The advantage with the harder one is it does give you nice forward drive, keeps those tyres square and flat. So that's great in certain instances. Even on dirt, we run a 1.8mm roll bar on a four-wheel drive, but we'll talk about four-wheel drive at a later date. Let's focus on two-wheel drive. So on the two-wheel drive, I generally run a 1.2 roll bar. You can go up to 1.3 or down to a 1.1, but then it gets a little bit soft with the 1.1. It's a big difference when you change between the 0.1 gauges. So that's a really important thing. So generally indoors we run a roll bar. Outdoors you might want to run a slightly softer one between a 1mm and a 1.1, but that depends what the track's like. If it's really bumpy and it's a bit twitchy, you don't need the roll bar on. Remember, if you run the roll bar on the back, you'll be putting pressure towards the front. What you can do is put a roll bar on the front, and the roll bars on the front, basically it deadens off the front a little bit. It puts the forces back to the back a little bit, lets the rear roll a bit more, makes the car a bit more comfortable to drive. You might be on a really high grip track which has got awkward conditions, and the roll bar will just help smooth the car out. Again, on four-wheel drive, if we focus on that area, we'd be running a nice stiff one, especially on carpet. But generally with our Cougar Laydown, we don't run one on the front. The front end's got really good stability. We don't feel we have to do it. Whereas I see some other brands, they like to run one quite a lot, which is up to them. I'm sure we'll come back to them from time to time where it's needed. Next up, we're going to talk about the shock positions. You generally see that we're normally laid over on the shocks, or we could be standing up, but we generally don't run there. The more you stand it up, the more kind of towards a linear feel that you have compared to what the shock's doing and the wheel's doing, so they're matching each other. But when you lay it down, you get a rising rate, and basically it starts off a bit softer and it will finish a bit harder at the end. So it will be a case where you will turn the car, and because of that more laid over feeling, the car will go instantly into a little bit into a lean, and you'll feel the car a bit more. Whereas you might find on some tracks, when you're changing direction, the car is slow to respond. By just standing up the back shock one hole, it will suddenly feel like this is really agile all of a sudden. But what you might lose is the feeling of when you get on power and you start steering, the car will push. So more laid over shock will give you a bit more on power steering because of that, but you lose that forward drive that you were after before. Also, a laid over shock will generally give you a little bit more side bite when you go into the corner, but when you stand it up, you get a little bit more forward drive, as we talked about, but you also get a bit more rotation out of the car, so you get a car that will pivot into the corner a bit better when you turn. It's putting that force to the front a bit more. It's a bit like when you've added that roll bar to the rear, sending the force forwards a bit more and keeping the rear supported. Remember, the car's on one plane, so whatever you do to that end will affect this end, and whatever you do to this end will affect that end. When you look at the front of the car again, we generally run the second from the inside hole, same as on the rear. Second from the inside hole is generally where we sit. If you go to the middle hole on the shock tower, it's a big change. You should be able to lean on the front when you go into the corner. If you find at the end of a straight on a carpet track or an Astro track, wherever you are, and the front's kind of dipping over and it's wanting to flip because it is going over too far, then standing up can help it out. But what you might find is you were on a hard spring before, you could soften the spring off slightly. Or if you were in the middle hole and you're a bit worried about moving in, you don't want to lose that feel that you had, you could lay it over but go up on a spring rate. So if you're on a black, you could go up to an orange, which is 0.3 different of a pound, and that's normally enough of a difference between half a hole on changing that spring rate. When looking down at the bottom end of the shock, it's where it connects to the wishbone. Obviously, if we move it out wider, it might not be obvious to you, as I said obviously, but if you move it out to the wider position, you'll find that it stiffens it up. And when you move it inside on that lower shock position, it'll really soften it up, it'll be really supple. And if you do that again, it's always worth running a harder spring. On our wishbone, we'll have a little look here. That looks in focus to me. We have an angle built in, so if we do go to the inside hole, we don't gain lots of extra droop. So obviously that's the droop, and this is bump. When you have bump, that's the wheel going up to the top and bottoming out, and when you have droop, it's going all the way down to the bottom. So if someone says to you, you've got too much droop, and you believe them, and maybe it is the right thing for you to do, you can always screw the shock bottom in, and it will bring it in a little bit. We run shims in front of our shocks, as you would have seen on the shock video, 1.5 millimeters, which then allows us to run a 20.2 droop setting, which is measured between the seal pack housing and the bottom of the shock rod that's sitting down there. On the rear we run 28.5, which is fine for generally most conditions that we run. At the bottom of the rear shock, we generally live on the middle hole. If we go inside, we must stiffen the shock oil and we must stiffen the spring. Again, if you go to the outside hole on the wishbone, you need to soften it off. You get a different installation ratio, and basically you need to accommodate that. The shock will have to do more per the movement of the wheel now. So if you've moved it outside, suddenly you're reducing that ratio between, again, what those two are doing, and so you need to soften things off to accommodate for it. Again, you might have to play with your pistons, but generally live on the middle hole. It will be absolutely great for you. And on the shock tower, second from the inside, or the inside is where I live. If you go to the middle hole, you need to go down to the red spring. If you're outdoors. Whereas if you're indoors, you could drop it down a spring and go to the blue if you were on the black. I generally run on the black. So that would be that on the front. Generally, again, second from the inside to the inside is where I live. Outdoors, we sometimes go middle to even standing up to the fourth hole from the inside. So we do utilise these hole positions from time to time. So that's that about shock positions. One last thing actually about shock positions, I can't finish there. What we do is we space, if I get this in view, the top of the shock, you'll see a setting in the book where you space it forwards about 3 millimeters. Let's make sure that stays in view. We space that forwards 3 mil. And what you'll find is it adds like a dual rate. The shock isn't actually working at the same angle of the wishbone. So as the shock's going through its normal motion, it's also going through another motion as it's coming up, so you get like a dual rate. And what we find is it lands better on the jumps, and we get a bit more steering on the carpet tracks. I generally don't run it. I've got enough steering out of the front end of the car, but if I do need to, I can space it forwards and get a bit more steering and also jump landing capability out of it. So that's that. What's the next thing to talk about? I want to talk about really only a couple of things in the video. I don't want to give you too much information in one go and you forget half of it. But battery position, generally we live around mid to the forward position for our carpet tracks and AstroTurf tracks. unless you're in very, very low grip conditions, like when we were at the Worlds in Slovakia. On the team's cars, we ran the batteries all the way to the back, just to give the rear tyres a chance to grip up and let the car dig in. But generally, when there's enough grip out there, you need to get the balance of the car a lot better. There is a penalty to have it at the backs. When you hit the brakes and the car starts sliding, you get a pendulum effect and the rear end of the car starts moving around. And you don't want that. You want to be able to catch the car. So putting more weight towards the front generally makes that easier. So on our carpet tracks, gives us more power steering. On AstroTurf, again, stops the nose lifting up and allows the rear to continue rotating with all that grip that we have. Whereas on dirt, we generally move the battery further back. But middle to the back is where we'd be with the kind of dirt positions, whereas middle to forwards is where we'd be on AstroTurf to carpet conditions. One other thing that I wanted to talk about is wings. A lot of people kind of talk about wings and we look at how much gurney we're running. Gurney being this piece here, which would be sticking up normally, but I trim mine down nice and low. We know that wings make a difference, because if we take this wing off, your car's not going to jump very well at all. Very, very difficult to drive in these moments. So I believe the planes which all the air is going over on the surfaces, it just keeps the car stable in the air. Generally on carpet we cut it off, but on dirt we always leave another 6mm on, just to give it a bit more of a chance of gaining some grip. That's really it. Just keep an eye on your wings. Don't let them crack and go bad and then break on the track when you're driving. Replace them from time to time. I've been asked about my wing. It's a matte effect that's on it, and I got this from Yawn. He just sprays the wings both sides. So that's been sprayed. There we are in view, and that side's been sprayed, and that's in view. So basically that's what I do there. I've got a crack here on the centre mine that needs changing. Have a little look here. This is from when I've been racing on the weekend. I don't think you can see in the view, but I've got a little crack just here. So give it a change. All the times you crash upside down, and sometimes I give like my old wing to somebody to help out, or keep it as a spare if I don't already have one. And then there's front wings to talk about. It's a topical thing with front wings, working out if it's done anything for you or not. I believe that the front wing actually offers a bit of weight at the same time, and sometimes that's why you like it. What we found was when we raced at Trenchant at the Hoodie Arena, when we took it off, the car became a bit more consistent. And I think that's because there's just a little bit less pressure on the front from either the weight or the effect of the air passing over it. I don't believe these cars are heavily aerodynamic, but they do feel the effects of the different positions of the Bodyshells, cab and stuff like that. I think that's all the different bits of drag that's smacking on them and everything. But that's a whole other thing to talk about one day, which I'm not an expert on, but we've learned over the years what kind of makes a difference. What I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it with that. That's 4 or 5 main things that I've talked about that should hopefully help you. Check out my first video if you haven't already seen it. That's talking about like steering and weight and things in various places. And find me any messages if you want to find out anything more. I've got loads of other videos lined up that I want to do to talk about setup. And I'll see you all soon. Ciao!